Hello everybody and welcome back to another video here on my channel. Today's video is another book related video and it is my August wrap up. Here's the stack of books for the most part that I read. There is one book that I didn't finish, but I wanted to include it into this video as well as my to be read for next month. I had 6 books projected last month for my to be read for August and I ended up finishing those 6 and also I ended up finishing one extra one, so 7 total, and I was in the process of working on another one. We do still have a couple days left of August, I think like 4, so I guess I could have been farther into this book, but also with our son being sick for a week, I was just over trying to get to where I wanted to be in the book, and that was just because it was just a challenge with a sick kid. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the video. The first book I'm going to start off with is a Nicholas Sparks book, The Choice. This is a romance fiction type book. I gave this book 4 stars. Normally Nicholas Sparks reads are super easy and I give a lot of his reads 4 stars. I was okay with this book. When they were back in, what was it, 1996, I enjoyed the story from 1996, but then the story continued in 2007 and I wasn't big on that whole story. I almost marked this 3 stars, and also at the time my husband and I finished up the original Jersey Shore and we were watching Jersey Shore Reunion, and we had only watched, because on Hulu there's only the 2 seasons, but when they were back in Miami, a big thing that the boys were saying were they kept yelling cheating, and when I read this book, since we were currently watching that season, all I could think of was cheating, and that is one reason sometimes I will mark down some of his books. It's just because of how the characters are, and some of them kind of bug me, and in this book she really bugged me, so I'm not gonna lie, honestly this probably should be a 3-star on my list now that I'm talking about it. The only Nicholas Sparks book in both my TBR and my August wrap up this time, and that is really exciting that I got to read different types of books. My next book is a very unique, I feel like more rare. I don't see many people, even on TikTok, talk about it too much. Apparently there is a movie and I have never heard of it, never watched it, and I found this at a thrift store and I liked the cover, so I decided to read it. It is Sarah's Key by Tatiana de Rosnay. It is a historical fiction. It's got the 2 different point of views every other chapter for the most part until you get to a certain point into the book. I enjoyed that a lot. This was a really good book with that. It's being revolved around when the French rounded up a bunch of Jews for the Nazis, and of course obviously we know how history went out with that. Majority of them didn't make it home. I liked the adventure and basically the suspense and everything in this book. Right off from the start though, in the first couple chapters, the main character, who was back in the 40s, decided to do something to try and save her brother. And I will just tell you, I knew exactly how it was going to play out. Sometimes you kind of can guess, and it's different just because of the writers, that it's fiction, so they might want to try and throw it off and make it like a happy story. But if you think back to real history, this isn't a happy story. It is very, tragic, and a lot of people are gone because of it. So I already knew basically the sadness that kind of went on throughout the book, but also with what she did for her brother, I already knew something was going to happen, and something did happen. I didn't think it was going to be the way it did for the most part, and I will say this is the only book I've ever really had to have emotion, not crying emotion. I still have never really cried or anything like that, but having emotion as like sitting there and then all of a sudden saying, oh, I knew it! This was the book to finally bring that out, and I enjoyed it. I just want to say, just be ready to basically be really sad because of, obviously it's a tragic history, but it was definitely worth the hype. I didn't care much for the point of view of the girl whose name is also Julia. I didn't really care much for a lot of things that I read about. I liked the ending a little bit, but at the same time I just felt like a lot of her story was unnecessary afterwards. All like the rambling on about her life when it didn't have anything to do with the first point of view. I did give this book 5 stars. The next book is the book that I read very first, and when I did my TBR, I had already read a book and a half. It is The Magnolia Story by Chip and Joanna Gaines. It is of course a biography and autobiography. This is basically their whole story, well not their whole story, but a big portion of their story about how they went from actually in debt and having a really hard time affording stuff to all of a sudden they somehow landed with Fixer Upper, and then they got to where they are now, where in Waco, Texas, they have like the silos and the Magnolia farm and everything like that. So it was really cool to see their side, their story of bits and pieces that I didn't know a lot about them, and especially when they first dated. And also I love how much she talked about God in this book, and also Chip. I like how she gave credit to God. It was a very interesting story. I normally am not big into autobiographies, but for some reason I have read a lot of biographies, and also I still have a couple more left to read. I'm glad that I found this one interesting. It was around 200 pages. I did also read Chip's version, which is Capital Gains, and this is an autobiography as well. This one I enjoyed. I didn't enjoy it as much as the Magnolia Story, but it was really cool to see his version, his side, and have a book for him. Both of these were 4-star reads. I didn't have a problem against them. My next book is the book that I got in middle school from a Scholastic book fair, and I was so obsessed with this book but never read it. I just love the cover. And this book is War Horse. I loved right off the bat how this book is in the perspective or point of view of the main character Joey, which is a horse, instead of somebody who owns this horse or somebody random, or it switches point of views between two different people. I liked having that perspective. I did rate this as well 4 stars, and it is also a historical fiction / war story. I enjoyed this book. It was a very, very fast read. The pages being obviously a book I feel like for younger kids to a point. It's very like bigger words, super easy to read. 160 pages, so it took me no time at all to finish this, and I really enjoyed it for a quick little read. My second to last book is a book that I read after I finished all of my TBR, and I was so excited to read this book, and it took me a very long time to get into it. It is The Life of Pi. I assume that they have a movie. I'm pretty sure they do, because I remember when it was really big going around, I found this book in a thrift store, so I decided to pick it up and buy it, and that was 2017, 2018, give or take. And this is a philosophical fiction. I rated this honestly 3 stars. It was a hard book for me to get into. I couldn't get into it. I really didn't care much for it until page 97, and that was a lot because of being in India. There are a lot of words that I had to either look up or just pronounce however I wanted to, because there were so many Indian words that it was just hard to try and pronounce them accurately. And I know that sounds stupid, but it took me 97 pages, which is when he then went into the ocean, all the way up until literally page 200. 200 is where I got super into the book, and then as soon as part 3 hits, where he finds land and goes to Mexico, I just almost quit the book right there. I was just, for some reason, I just didn't like it. So this was a 3-star just because of the middle. It saved it. Otherwise, if it wasn't for me being so interested when he was out in the ocean, it probably would have been a 2-star. But also, I think because I was so excited to read it, and then I just had a really hard time in the beginning getting into it, so I think that kind of ruined the whole book for me. Pick it up if you are interested. And the last book that I fully read was one of my other top favorites of this month. It is The Legend of Storey County. This is a historical fiction and also a Western fiction. I enjoyed this book so much. I like how it was to the times, obviously, being back. He starts out in 1938 being a news reporter, and then he sits down to hear this man's story about his whole basically childhood to his whole life, and it goes back to the 1860s. So if you can imagine during the Civil War and all that, what exactly, because the main character is technically half black, you can imagine some of the words, and I actually enjoyed that a lot because I like more realistic to the times type books. If you're going to dedicate it to that generation, it would be best to actually keep it very, very realistic. And it was 230 something pages. I enjoyed it. It was something that every chapter had an action-packed event, kept you on your toes for one, but also it was just overall a good fiction book, and I rated this 5 stars. This was my only other book that I rated 5 stars, and I love the cover. I liked how the words looked, and also like the chapters. It's so simple. I just enjoyed how everything looked, and this book just felt so good in my hands. So definitely 5 stars for almost everything about it. And my last book is something that I read a little bit of. I wanted to honestly get to page 300 or so, and I was hoping to get farther into the book, but like I said, with my son being sick, my husband on a trip, I did not get to do that. And I did start it, I got really excited, but as vulgar as Stephen King is, I have the uncut version of The Stand. The reason I didn't come close to, you can see a little bit of how far I got into it. The reason I didn't finish it is because no way I could get, I knew I wasn't gonna finish it because I had 5 days left. It is over 1,100 pages long. It's 1,141 pages. I thought it was a 600 or so page book. So I thought around 200 to 300 pages when I opened it halfway. And when I opened it halfway, I'm at 652, and that's sad. So I'm only at page 117, not very far into it. I like it so far, but like I said, Stephen King is just very vulgar. And I've only ever read Christine because Christine is my favorite movie. My mom had a second book of Christine, so I did go ahead and read it, and I found out Christine is nothing like the movie, and I was kind of down about it, but I still love the movie so much. It's still my favorite movie, and I love the book, so I wanted to take a chance. I have 4 total Stephen King books that my mom had 2 copies of each. I'll read the back real fast. It says, imagine America devastated by a vast killer plague that moves from coast to coast. Imagine the countryside destroyed and great cities decimated as the entire population desperately and futilely seeks safety. Imagine then an even greater evil rising to threaten the survivors, and at last, embattled group of men and women coming together to make a last stand against it. Here is Stephen King's most terrifying version, his most stirring story, and his most magnificent cast of characters, his ultimate tale of good versus evil, his supreme triumph, published in its complete uncut version. Definitely uncut is a good word. He said something in the author's note. It is a thriller fiction. It says, for the purposes of this book, what's important is that approximately 400 pages of manuscript were deleted from the final draft. That is the one book I didn't finish, and that is the first book for September's TBR, which will be posted a couple days after this video. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I hope these books seemed a little bit interesting, and if you did not know or have not watched any of my other book-related videos, I have been making for a whole year now a no-buy and trying to read every book that I've ever had. And because of that, I do have really random, unique books that I bought at thrift stores, I've gotten at Hobby Lobby, like the Magnolia Story. So they're the most random stories. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I hope you guys subscribe and stay tuned for my September TBR, and also check back on my July wrap-up and August TBR. They were combined into one whole video. Also, a huge thank you for the 500 subscribers. I appreciate them all, every single one of y'all. I hope to see y'all next week, and God bless.